The light breaks. It's the sun making its slow and measured approach above the horizon. Like many of us, emerging beyond the white curtain. We sing, like Langston Hughes once wrote in the singular, I too sing America. We play without the masks that Dunbar scripted so long ago. And we compose the music that must be, is being heard with ears that would not hear before. We are departing the kitchen of the darker brother. This is the tomorrow, and the table is set. Welcome to Classical Music in Color. I'm Judlin Gibson. I have wonderful news. There's a syndicated radio show introducing the music of black classical composers and musicians to a wider audience. It's Gateways Radio. I talked to host and producer Garrett McQueen. Then there's what you don't know about one of the civil rights leaders, Bayard Rustin. Yes, Bayard. More about that later. And because it's February, Black History Month, I have more than a few new releases and events to tell you about. One of them is an article called Being Black at the Symphony. Stay tuned for it all on this, the February 2023 edition of Classical Music in Color. Have you heard about this?
My name is Garrett McQueen. A pleasure for me to be your host for Gateways Radio. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Garrett McQueen, hosting what has to be the first syndicated radio program, playing the music of classical musicians and composers of color. They're from all over the world and centuries ago. Gateways Radio.
The core of the programming consists of performances that feature the Gateways Music Festival Orchestra and Gateways Music Festival musicians. So we have the large orchestral performances, but I have also included recordings of the Gateways Music Festival piano recitals. You'll get to hear black organists, as well as works for chamber ensembles, string quartets, wind quintets, all sorts of configurations of Gateways Music Festival musicians. I've incorporated the now Grammy-winning recording about the Philadelphia Orchestra of Music of Florence Price. We've even integrated an ensemble from South Africa into the programming. So it is a broad array of performances that highlight, as I say in the program, the music and musicians of the African diaspora.
You'll be explaining things. You'll tell us why perhaps they wrote the way they did.
It's one thing to just hear these recordings, but I'm absolutely honored to have the privilege of contextualizing these recordings, to tell stories, to connect them to today, and help people, as you say, understand the importance of shining a light on this music and these musicians.
McQueen says this radio show is right on time.
My personal feeling is that the thirst for this music and the thirst for this context of orchestral music has really never had the broad appeal as it does now. I'm only 35 years old. I can't speak to the historical nature of this conversation, but I do have access to what has been programmed by orchestras for decades past, what the major recording labels have recorded. If I compare those days to what I'm seeing today, it gives me a lot of hope. It's becoming not so unusual to attend an orchestra concert and to hear music by a black composer.
Host Garrett McQueen of Gateways Radio. So far, up to 14 radio stations have signed up to air Gateways Radio. Check with your local classical radio station to see if they're on the list. If not, you know what to do. You may or may not know the name Bayard Rustin. He was considered the Black Socrates of the Civil Rights Movement. He's the guy who took part in freedom rides and who organized the 1963 March on Washington in 6 weeks. There's a few other things about him that you may not know. One of them is the pronunciation of his first name.
He instantly knew whether people knew him or not based on whether they used the right pronunciation, Bayard or Bayard. So
Wow.
that was interesting to get policed on that, and I appreciated it, and that's why I'm at Bayard.
That's Lauren Ludwig, a music historian out of Baltimore. Why are we talking to a music historian about Bayard Rustin? Here's why.
Flow, my tears, fall from your springs, exile forever, let me mourn.
That's him singing Elizabethan music, as it was called in the 1950s and 60s, now known as early music. Musical historian Lauren Ludwig says he first came to know about Rustin through his musical career and did not know about his civil rights work until later. He learned how Rustin was initially introduced to early music.
He was imprisoned as a conscientious objector to World War II, and that's actually when he first started playing the lute. His lover at the time, who they had an epistolary romance while he was in prison. This lover of his got him a lute, and he taught himself to play it, and I think that was one of his entrees to Elizabethan music. Certainly, he'd grown up in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and as a singer, he toured with the Wilberforce Quartet. So Rustin had this whole other musical history and was very connected to African American musical traditions. He encountered early music when he got this lute. And on the point of his bravery, I just wanted to say that when he was a conscientious objector, he actually started organizing politically in the prison, and specifically against racist practices in the prison system. And to me, to imagine a person in that context so vulnerable in various ways, nevertheless, mobilizing nonviolent direct action. There are these stories of like guards and other prisoners, white prisoners, intimidating him and threatening to beat him up. And what he discovered is that by just not fighting back, just letting them hit him, that was so powerful and disorienting to them that he actually had tremendous success in his activism in that context. And to me, that's like a level of bravery that I can't conceive.
There were other men who were gay, who were open in this early period, and he was one of them. Tell me about that.
Once he sort of learned that he was gay, he didn't act to conceal that. He was basically, sort of, for all intents and purposes, out. And, the institutions and the civil rights leaders that he was working with, I think, recognized very soon that could be weaponized against the whole movement. And so that, in combination with the fact that he had briefly worked with a communist organization in the 40s, or I guess in the late 30s when he first came to New York, that was enough to kind of tar him. Martin Luther King and A. Philip Randolph and other folks, despite the stigma that they knew would be leveled against Rustin, still continued to work with him and foreground him in various ways, even though he wasn't as visible as he would have otherwise been.
Ludwig says Rustin used this early music as part of the civil rights movement.
One of the songs, I Saw Her As I Came and Went, is really fascinating because it sounds, for all the world, like a lute song, like an Elizabethan lute song. And this poetry that sounds quite Elizabethan, it turns out that poetry was new poetry from 1951. What Rustin did was take this Vedanta poem and compose a lute song around it. And the connection there is that, the Vedanta movement was specifically around the, independence and Gandhi's use of nonviolent direct action. So I think what Rustin was doing with I Saw Her As I Came and Went was kind of slipping in a little bit of this world of Indian activism to civil rights leaders and the civil rights movement.
Now here's I Saw Her As I Came and Went. It was composed and performed by Bayard Rustin.
I saw her as I came and went. I saw her queenly, meek and mild, as innocent as any child. A flower among her flowers, content. I come again, and in her place are silence and a vacant room, and in my heart a sudden gloom that I no more shall see, shall not see her face. There was a word I would have said, but what it was I hardly know. I let the days glide by and lo, I now must say it to the dead.
Bayard Rustin, performing his composition, I Saw Her As I Came and Went. Rustin can be heard on 2 albums, Elizabethan Songs and Negro Spirituals, and 12 spirituals on the life of Christ.
Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel saw the wheel way in the middle of the air. And the bigger
There are documentaries about him, one called Brother Outsider, The Life of Bayard Rustin. The other, a Netflix film simply called Rustin. That one is produced by the Obama's Higher Ground production company. It'll be out this year on Netflix for the 60th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington.
Ah, the sighs that come from my heart.
Bayard Rustin, singer of early music and a civil rights leader. He was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania in 1912. He died in New York in 1987. I'd like to thank Parnassus Records for giving me permission to play the music of Bayard Rustin. There are links on the Classical Music and Color page on secondstreetdreams.com. Next up, new releases and competitions. For those of you who love opera, this is for you. Decca has released a 3-CD set of the performances of soprano Jessie Norman. It's called Jessie Norman, The Unreleased Masters. These are never-before-heard recordings, including Tristan und Isolde, song cycles of Wagner and Strauss, and live recordings of cantatas by Haydn, Berlioz, and Britten. Norman died in 2019 after a 6-decade-long career on the stages and recital halls of some of the most prestigious houses in the world. This four-time Grammy winner and Howard University graduate was born in Georgia in 1945. Look for the links on the Classical Music and Color page on secondstreetdreams.com. Now for the competitions. Applications are open for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra Fellows Program for the 2023-24 season. This is for musicians playing most string instruments. The CSO Fellows Program is specifically looking for musicians who identify as Black, Latino, or Indigenous. The deadline to apply is March 15th. Composers, Juventus is calling. This chamber music group, based in Boston, is looking for chamber music and art songs related to birds. Selected works will be performed by Juventus in the fall. They are charging $11 per submission, but they emphasize that winning composers will receive a CD quality recording of the live performance and, of course, ownership of their work into perpetuity. The deadline to apply is March 1st. Links are on the Classical Music and Color page on secondstreetdreams.com. Our coda this month is from an article written by Cedric McCoy. He's an assistant editor of the Michigan Daily, the weekly student newspaper of the University of Michigan. In Being Black at the Symphony, McCoy recounts his experience with a friend at a performance of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, something the couple were looking forward to because Jonathan Hayward was guest conducting. Hayward is going to be the first black conductor of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. The couple were all set for a fantastic time. Then came intermission. McCoy says an older white woman turned to them and first asked about the jewelry McCoy was wearing. It was a West African symbol representing wisdom and intellect. Then more questions. So what do you think of this music? McCoy says he thought about messing with her mind for a moment by talking about 90s rappers, but instead launched into a minute or more long review of the music and composers in the first segment of the concert. After that, the light seemed to dawn on her. Oh, I get it, she says. So you're music people. McCoy responded by telling her they are musicology students. That surprised her, he writes, because then she announced her alumni status at the University of Michigan. She never said another word. McCoy and his friend were kind of puzzled by this experience until they realized it was a microaggression. This woman, he wrote, needed to validate the black couple's attendance at the concert. And the work goes on. Thank you, Cedric McCoy, for allowing me to share your article, Being Black at the Symphony. And thank you for listening to the February 2023 edition of Classical Music in Color. We are the Second Street Dreams audio network on the radio and on the www. All the links are on the Classical Music in Color page on secondstreetdreams.com. I'm Judelyn Gibson.